I'll bring people in the usual fashion.
Yep.
I'll admit all, and I'll run the lobby and I'll open up the chat room as usual. And we'll start and see where we get to. Hang on, let's just admit all. Here we go. Here we go. Good morning, Justin. Good morning, James. Good morning, Shona. Good morning, Carey. Thank you for joining. If you could mute, that would be excellent to allow Sir Steve to speak shortly. That would be great. If you've just joined, if you could mute. Welcome one and all. Good morning, Kate. Good morning, Alan. So that's good. More and more people joining. We've had an apology, Steve, from Margaret, by the way. She's had to take an urgent call at 10:30, but she is joining, but she's going to come in a bit late. Okay. Good morning, Mark. Good morning, David. If you've just joined, if you could mute, that would be good. Thank you very much. In the usual fashion, we'll monitor the lobby, and Kevin as well. Good morning, Kevin. Good morning, Barry. So lots of people joining, which is good. Yes, Steve and I were just talking about big day for prime ministers today. So you've all been seeing the news, and we will wait with bated breath on the. There's a speech at 4 o'clock, isn't that, Steve? There's a Downing Street speech, I think, at 4 o'clock today.
I think like weather permitting, I believe is.
Oh yeah, because thunder and lightning. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, it's a big day for politics, as they say. Just think a few more coming in, Steve, now. So let me just admit a few more. We'll leave it another minute, Steve. That's all right, and then we can perhaps start if that's okay with you. Good morning, David Robbins. Good morning, Darius. Good morning, Nick. We'll probably start actually, Steve. I'll monitor the lobby. So John's submitted as well. Good morning, everybody. We'll start the session now. Welcome to Coffee Morning, Pension Playpen Coffee Morning. We are delighted that Sir Steve will be telling us about his mother's missing millions, but also an update on state pensions, which I think will be very, very useful for quite a few of us on this call. As usual, we want to record the session, so can we have everybody's thumbs up that we're okay to record? So the recording is on. I will monitor the chat as usual. If you want to raise a hand and ask Steve a question, then please do. Good morning, Adrian. Good morning, Andre. If the recent joiners could mute, that would be good, just to back out some background noise. Andre, if you could mute, that would be good. Cheers, Adrian. Thank you very much. As I say, if you want to raise a hand, that would be great as well. So, Sir Steve, over to you, and we will start the session. Okay, I think we're ready to go, Steve, when you're ready.
Marvellous. Switching off mute probably helps. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. Great to find 27 other people who care about the state pension. That's always a good sign. And I thought what I'd try and do is a bit of a tour d'horizon, as they say, of state pension issues. The session was advertised as telling you about what the department call the second biggest source of error in state pensions. So I thought I probably ought to kick off by telling you about the biggest source of error in state pensions and where we've got to and all of that. Share with you a bit on the second biggest source of error. Say a bit about state pension and gender pension inequality, because something quite funny is going on, which not everybody has noticed. So I thought I might do a bit of that. Henry insisted I said something about state pension ages, but I don't think he's dialed up yet. So if Henry pops up, just shout and I'll say something about state pension ages, but otherwise I may not. So if we kick off. So DWP is making a lot of mistakes. I can see shocked faces on the screen in front of me, but it's true. DWP is making a lot of mistakes on state pensions. And when I'm interviewed, there's a few questions I get asked. One is, why do they make so many mistakes? And the other is, why is it always women? Because it is overwhelmingly women who are affected. And just on that specific question, I mean, basically, if we're talking primarily about the old state pension system, in general, men are working for most of their working life, paying full rate national insurance and drawing full pensions. So although they could mess up the SERPS calculation, and goodness only knows whether they do or they don't, the basic pension for men is kind of okay in the sense that they get a full pension and that's right, and they get on with their lives. The reason there are so many mistakes on women is that the system designed in the 1940s, as you know, assumed that women would be financially dependent on their husbands in retirement. And we still in the 2020s are living with the legacy of that system, which means that married women get derived entitlements from their husbands, divorced women get derived entitlement from their ex-husbands, widows get derived entitlement from their late husbands, and anybody over 80 gets something for being over 80 beyond the 25p. So there's an awful lot more potential for getting these things wrong, and there are credits and protection for time at home with the kids, which on average tends to be women more than men. So you can kind of see why the complexity of the system tends to have an adverse effect on women, in the sense that it creates lots of potential for getting it wrong. And I think what's most shocking to me about all of this saga of the government getting state pensions wrong is the scale of it, and the fact that it's gone on for decades without anybody really noticing. And one of the things that I'm aware of, and I was in the chair for 5 years at this period, is I have no doubt that every week, probably every day, people rang the department and said, "Oh, I think my pension's wrong." And the department said, "Oh, yes, it is, isn't it?" and fixed it. And nobody ever stepped back and said, "Hang on, we've got a systematic problem here." And I've asked myself many times the question, well, why didn't I spot this? And one reason is you get figures in the DWP. And first of all, in the DWP, you become blind to small numbers, because everything in the DWP is just 20 times bigger than any other department, more or less. When you see a figure that there's an error of so many million, you kind of think, well, that's rounding error. You don't get out of bed for less than $1 billion in the DWP. So, when we used to get annual, thank you, Stuart, when we used to get annual figures for fraud and error in benefits and so on, I used to feel quite smug, because my colleagues doing universal credit and ESA and all that sort of stuff would have, single digit percentage errors. I'd have 0 point something or other, 99 point something percent accurate for state pensions. That's pretty good, isn't it? Tick in the box, go and do something else. But of course, a small percentage of a very big number is still a lot of people. And if that error is wrong this year and next year and the year after for the same person, it adds up to a lot of money. In other words, just the way the problem was framed and the information given to ministers didn't pick up a huge error. And I share my responsibility for that. So what went wrong? So the biggest error was when something changed in a woman's life, her pension should have been reassessed, and it wasn't. And the three things that could change was her husband could retire, at which point she can get a married woman's pension, or her husband could die, at which point she can get a widow's pension, or she turns 80, in which she can then get a minimum non-contributory pension. And all three of those things were not happening in some cases. In other words, what happened is the husband retires, a flag goes on the system to say we need to reassess the wife's pension, but nobody picks up the flag. And the National Audit Office did a report, and they looked at the DWP system, and they found, take a big deep breath here, 5 million unacted upon notes. Just think about that for a minute. 5 million notes to self, do something. Now, not all of them will affect the amount payable, but if there are changes of address, someone's died, someone's got married, all that stuff, 5 million unacted upon. Yeah, so massive scale of things changing, people's pensions not being reassessed. So what do we now know? We now know that they think they owe £1.5 billion. So they're going to spend the period up to late 2024 checking 700,000 cases one by one to see if they're right. And they think about 1 in 3 of those will be wrong. So about 230,000 or so will be wrong. And they will then pay these people and their estates, because quite tens of thousands of these people are deceased. They will then pay out £1.5 billion in arrears by the end of 2024. And it's just mind-numbing. Over 1,500 civil servants will be working on this at peak, full-time, doing nothing else for a couple of years of their life than one by one checking for errors in state pensions. So staggering scale of error here. And, you know, the permanent secretary of the DWP has had to make provision in the annual accounts of £1.5 billion. And I wouldn't have wanted to be in the room when he went to the Treasury and said, oh, can we have an extra £1.5 billion, please? Because we've been underpaid for the last 30 years. So, and just to give you some sense of how much money we're talking about, you know, the real human beings, the average over 80 who's underpaid is getting 4,000 quid in arrears. The average married woman who's underpaid is getting 7,000 in arrears. The average widow who's underpaid is getting 9,500 in arrears. But there's huge variation. So we know six-figure compensation sums. A very elderly widow got over £100,000 in arrears because she'd been underpaid for over 20 odd years. You know, it's incredible amounts of money.
Steve,
And
can
so,
I just interrupt?
Yeah.
Because I know Henry probably was wanting to butt in as well. If 1,500 civil servants are going to spend 2 or 3 years fixing this problem, and I know it's a bit of a curveball, but you know, Pension Playpen has been promoting and working with Guy obviously on pension credits. Is there any you know, left hand, right hand to say, whilst we're looking at all this data, can pension credits be included in this calculation as well? Because disappointingly, I don't know if everybody knows this, but on pension credits, I spoke to Guy, and they only go back 3 months. So you could have missed out on years and years and years of pension credits, but they can only go back 3 months. But even if we can grab some of these people to get the pension credit bit right, wouldn't that be a double bonus or a double gain? Or I don't know.
I don't think that's going to happen, Steve, and there's two reasons really. I mean, one is the mere task I have just described is colossal. You know, just getting the state pensions correct is a huge job, and it's important that they do that. They do the day job. They do the thing they're there to do. Assessing them for pension credit, one of the problems is the government doesn't have the data on the system to assess people for pension credit. If it did, it would just pay it. Because pension credit doesn't just depend on the state pension of the individual, it depends on all the other income of the individual, like their occupational pension, which isn't on the system. It depends on the income of the spouse and the spouse's occupational pension and their earnings and their savings. So it's not like somebody in Darlington or Newcastle can sit down and say, right, I fixed your pension, Mrs. Jones. Now let's see if you're eligible for pension credit, because they don't know. They could write out and say, here's a pension credit claim form, will you fill it in? I mean, they could do that, but they could do that anyway. They don't, you know, so I don't think it helps with that issue. So, but just one other thing to say is, I've said £1.5 billion is owed. How much have they paid out so far? 0.1 billion. So by the end of March this year, they'd paid 100 million out of 1.5 billion. So that means there is 1.4 billion-ish still owed, which means that there are probably 150,000 to 200,000 people still walking down the street past your window on the wrong pension. You know, this is still massively unresolved at first. So one win as a result of this is they have realized they probably ought to check better. So in this year's annual report, we opened it up, and guess what? For the first time since 2005-06, they did a proper check of state pension payments. For 17 years, they haven't been doing it. So they do a proper check. And what they actually did was they phoned some people up. It's amazing, shocking, cutting edge stuff. They looked at some people with low pensions and they phoned them up. Said, Mrs. Jones, you're only getting £70 a week. You know, tell us about your working history. Oh, yeah. Tell us about your kids. Oh, yeah, I was at home with the kids for 15 years. What? But there's nothing on your NI record to show that. Oh dear, we'd better pay you some missing money. And then they phone the next person, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Jones, Mrs. whatever. Oh, you were at home with the kids. Oh, nothing on the NI record for that. We owe you some money. And you can get the sense that they made lots of these phone calls, and a significant minority of them, they found this missing protection for time at home with the kids. So this isn't new. So when I was a pesky opposition backbench MP in about 2007 and 8, I started hearing about cases like this, and I raised it with the department in Parliament. And in the end, they said, you know what, Steve, there is a problem here. That back in the day, you could claim child benefit without putting your national insurance number on. And that meant the child benefit data didn't get matched onto the national insurance computer, which is a different computer. And that then didn't feed into your state pension record. So there was a known problem, which I highlighted. And they then did a correction exercise, and that cost them 83 million quid in arrears to 36,000 mothers, plus an extra 10 a week on their pension. So this is about 2010, 2011. So I asked as a new minister for the results of that exercise, and that's what I was told. And I then just assumed the problem had been fixed. And it turns out a decade later, it wasn't. So they have now found women who are missing out on protection for time at home with the kids. And I'll say a bit more about that in a second. But to just give you one example, I do a column for This Is Money. People write in, tell us their stories, and we get lots of case studies through that route. And this lady got in touch to say, I phoned the DWP and asked about my state pension. And they said, sorry, Mrs. Jones, you are not entitled to a pension. And of course, people take them at face value, don't they? If they tell you you're not entitled, you don't bother to claim. And of course, if you don't bother to claim, you are not on the DWP's computer. So if you're not on the computer, they never check because you're not there. There's no claim, there's no pension payment. So they don't pick up errors of people who've been wrongly told they're not entitled. So we looked at this lady's record and said, but you were at home with the kids for 12 years. Oh, yes, dear. Well, if you'd had credit for 12 years at home with the kids, you'd now be getting a pension of £79 a week. Oh, would I? So we then go back to the HMRC, we get the home responsibilities protection put on the record, then DWP recalculate the pension, pay her 4,000 quid in back pension and £79 a week, as against zero. Now, the differences aren't always as stark as that, but a lot of what you might loosely call women who followed traditional, what you might once have called stay-at-home mums, for want of a better phrase, have decades sometimes at home, time at home with the kids. And here's something I think is really interesting. In the new state pension, or since 2010, years at home with the kids count in full as full national insurance credits, just the same as if you spent a year in paid employment running a big company. They used to be, I hope you'll forgive me this phrase, they used to be time off for good behaviour. So the way home responsibilities protection used to work is instead of needing 39 years for a pension, which a woman needed, if you'd had 1 year at home with the kids, you only needed 38. If you had 2 years, you only needed 37. But you still had to have made actual contributions up to 25% to get anything. So if you spent your entire life at home with the kids, you get no pension because you never paid some actual contributions. Now, since 2010, the old time off for good behaviour years have been turned into actual years of actual NI. And that, incidentally, is where they think things have gone wrong. They failed to properly convert the old HRP into actual credits, which should have happened in 2010. So there are women who probably have got HRP on their record, but it was never turned into actual credits, and it's now missing, therefore, on their NI record. We think that's where the problem happened. But the point about this is, if you only ever stayed at home with the kids, you are now entitled to a state pension as long as you've got 10 years. So there's a whole bunch of women who maybe have been told they're not entitled because the HRP is missing and they should be getting it. So we've created a website and we do 3 steps. We do step 1, what were the rules? Post 1978, at home with the kids, getting child benefits, not paying the married woman stamp. That's about it. Step 2, is it on your NI record? Well, post 2010, HRP turns into credits. Credits show on your NI record. So you can check your NI record online. Pre-2010, HRP doesn't show on your NI record, so you have to phone them up and say, is it there? Because it's time off for good behaviour. It's not actual years of contribution, so it doesn't show in the same way. But either way, you can check. And step 3, if it's missing, well, there are 2 options. One is we let the government fix it. So one option is governments at HMRC and DWP say they're looking into the issue. They won't know till the autumn the scale of it, etc. But suppose they decide to do a correction exercise. When are they going to do it? Are they going to drag people off the other one I told you about that's running till 2024? Are they going to stick it on the end into 2025? Or are they going to employ even more civil servants to check even more thousands of cases to correct even more errors? Practically, there won't be anybody doing anything else in the DWP at this rate other than correcting state pension errors. So if I was a woman going into this winter with high fuel bills, worried about my reduced pension, I would not wait for HMRC and DWP to fix this for me. Now, when we put the story out last week, the official line was, don't call us. The government's position was, please do not ring us. Please do not contact us. We're on the case. Well, sorry, I'm not going to wait if it's me. So we've given them a link to the CF411 form, which you claim home responsibilities protection. And this is a yummy form. I like this form. It says things like, what is the name of your children? When were they born? And if you happen to know their NI number, that's a bonus. That's it. You don't need nothing complicated on the form, just that information. And so we've now created the website. We had 20 or 30,000 hits so far, but we're going to keep pushing it. It should be in the mail tomorrow, etc. And we want all the women affected to come forward now to actually claim and get their HRP, etc., put on their record and then converted into a higher state pension. So that's a flavour. This is the second biggest error in state pensions. Again, affecting overwhelmingly women. One other thing to mention that might be useful is sometimes dad claim the child benefit. So if I give you a scenario, mother's had a rough labour, there's a child benefit form in the bounty pack. Dad thinks he's being helpful, and he fills the child benefit form in and puts his name on it. So 30 years later, you come back and say, hang on a minute, why isn't mum getting the credits? And the answer is because dad got the blooming child benefit. But he was in paid work as well, stereotypically, but he often was in paid work. So he's getting NI paid and credits. She's getting nothing, and you can flip them. So as long as she reaches pension age after 2008, you fill in a form and say, can we move the credits from the husband to the wife? And as long as you do that, she then gets the credit she should have been getting all along, and it's all fine. But people don't know that. So again, I think there are huge numbers of people who could be getting this who aren't. Just one other slightly wider point. I think there are lots of women on zero pensions, that is, women who've never claimed a pension, who, if they claimed, would get money. So it's women I've just described who are wrongly told no pension when they should be getting HRP. But it's women who, for example, yes, had no pension in their own right, but then when their husband retired, could have claimed a married woman's pension on his record, but never did because there was no prompt to do so. And if they claim now, they'd be treated as making a deferred claim for 15 years and get tens of thousands of quid, but nobody's telling them. Or they're over 80 and they've never heard of the non-contributory category D pension, which they have to claim if they're not getting a pension. So there's a whole bunch of women over 60 or 65 or 66 now who are getting no pension who really should be. And so there's huge amounts of untapped money there. And I can see the questions are coming in, which is great. I'm just going to do one more topic, Steve, and then I'm going to pass back to you. It's kind of linked to what I've been talking about so far, which is gender equality in the state pension. Because periodically DWP put figures out and they show, guess what, the average man gets far more in state pension than the average woman. If you split the new and the old state pension, it looks quite different. So old pension, based on the assumption women depend on men, married women, older, over 80s, etc., very, very low pensions. We know that. That's kind of the system we've inherited. New state pension, much closer. But I'm going to go further than that. I think we will come to a point probably in the next decade where the average newly retired woman will get a bigger state pension than the average newly retired man. Now, the point of the new state pension was to equalise. And when the first year the new state pension came in, the gap was about 9 quid between men and women. A lot smaller than the old system, but it's still about 9 quid. And every quarter they publish new figures, and that gap is down to about 5 quid now. But every time they publish a figure, they're still including the people who were 9 quid apart 6 years ago, and the people who were 8 quid apart 5 years ago, and the people who were 7 quid apart 4 years ago. So the newly retired people must be way less than 5 quid apart, because the average is the average of everybody, and we've got 9s and 8s and 7s in, so we must have 2s and 3s and 4s in as well. And every quarter this gap is going down, which means the newly retired in the last 3 months must be way below £5 apart. And there is a reason for that, which is the protected pension element, which is kind of a hangover from SERPs, is gradually being phased out. And men tended to have big SERPs, therefore men tend to have bigger protected pensions, therefore men still in the new system over a transitional period get a bit more than women. But that is disappearing. So I think we're quite close to the crossover point where we get sort of equality. But I'm going to go further and say, actually, in the pipeline, it looks as though men are not building up as many national insurance rights as women. Because there's quite a lot of men who, for example, I don't know, are in their late 50s, who have stopped work, are in moderate health but not great health, not sick enough to pass the sick test for ESA and get credits, but not working. So they're building up gaps. And parliamentary question was tabled recently, which looked at the number of men and the number of women who in the most recent year build up a year of national insurance, and there were more women than men. A decade ago, it was the other way around. So I think, bizarrely, we are storing up a system where women on average will get the flat rate new state pension in full, and men with fractured contribution records will actually start to fall slightly behind. Now, there's a hell of a lot in the rest of the system that's working rather well for men. My heart doesn't exactly bleed, but it's a bit shocking, isn't it? Who would have thought that the new state pension would ultimately deliver equality, which was the point, equality pretty soon. And even we now start focusing a little bit on national insurance credits and men missing out. Who would have thought? So there you go. I hope that's slightly unexpected and a bit interesting, but I can see lots of questions are coming through, Steve. So if I let you field them, and happy to do wider, Liz Trust and all the rest of it. But over to you, Steve.
Yeah, just obviously Andrew Young has put a question. Andrew, do you want to just sort of raise your question, Andrew, to Steve, or if you can unmute? Okay, well, I'll ask the question. Will people who have had pension credit and get backdated state pension have it reduced because of the past pension credit? Will there be an adjustment?
Yes. So the
really?
figures I'm quoting are net.
Ah.
And so we get cases where someone's been underpaid, 60,000 quid worth of pension, but because they were on a pathetically low pension, they then claim pension credit, as you would. And the government says, well, had we paid you the right pension at the time, we wouldn't have paid you the pension credit. So we claw that back and they end up getting 50p or whatever.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Barry's said about the website address, and I think Henry's posted that on there. So if you look in the chat room, there is the website address for your new Missing Millions, Steve, which I think is very, very helpful, which is really, really good. One question again, obviously we've got a number of providers and trustees and administrators on this call. This sounds like a bit of a headache for the government in terms of the calculation or the recalculation. And as you probably recall, Steve, there was a lot of people getting involved with pension calculations and redress, we call it, I guess, in the private sector, redress. In that space, I mean, did they do any analysis of the private sector who could come in and help speed up the process? I'm not saying a Capita or a Mercer or whatever, but was there ever a thought that, well, should 1,500 civil servants help out with this problem, or should we outsource it? Was outsourcing ever considered to speed up the process?
I don't know. Guy Opperman wasn't given to bring him into his confidences terribly often for reasons I can't quite imagine. I'm sure they looked at it. I think that one of the challenges is there is a pretty steep learning curve on all this stuff. In a way, the simple cases are pretty simple. If you're over 80, you get 85 quid. End of, as it were. But if you are, some of them are horrific. You're a widow with inherited deferred increments of GRB and 80% SERPs because of the year he died minus the 50% COD uprated by this. I mean, it's just mind-numbing. So I think it would have taken so long to train people that at least if you have people within the department who have some basic familiarity with the system, that's probably why they've done it in-house. But just on redress, I mean, the interest, I just mentioned interest as an aside. When we were taking one-off cases to them, they would pay interest. Not much, frankly, but they would literally week by week go back and say, right, well, we underpaid you £30 in 2005. The interest since then is such and such. The next week we underpaid you £29.72, etc., etc. They stopped paying interest once they did a bulk exercise. They said it is not our policy to pay interest.
But hang on, the Treasury charges us interest for the taxpayer at whatever it is, bank base plus whatever they fancy. So, but it doesn't go the other way.
No, and I mean, you might be able to do a maladministration complaint. So you might be able to say, look, yeah, well, it's fine, you paid me my missing money, but I've been underpaid for 30 years. If you'd paid me on time, I'd have been able to invest it, etc. And you might win a maladministration complaint. But I think their argument is this is such a massive job, just getting the day job wrong. If we layer a tier of calculating interest on, we'll be going until 2028 or something. And I think they just, pragmatically have decided not to bother.
I mean, the mothers and the citizens or whatever, I mean, they'll be very disappointed with that, especially with interest rates likely to continue to rise. That's a very disappointing situation, I guess.
Well, it's worse than that as well, because if you get a lump sum, so obviously there's tax to be paid, although the tax only goes back 4 years. So anything before 4 years ago was written off, but you have to pay tax on as if you'd had the pension on time for the last 4 years. But then if you are on benefit, you've suddenly got a lump sum in your bank account. And if you're in a care home, you've suddenly got a lump sum. We've had cases of people who've suddenly been told that the council won't pay their care home fees anymore because they've just had arrears of state pension paid in. And DWP just doesn't give a damn, frankly. They send the cheque out and regard their job as done. And they don't even equip people to know what the knock-on effects might be. It's utter departmentalitis. You know, they didn't even tell people what the tax treatment was. In the end, I had to ask a friendly MP to table a parliamentary question to get a straight answer on the tax question.
Wow, wow, that's a shambles.
As Margaret says.
It just exactly took the words right out of my mouth, Margaret. Actually, Margaret, we'll come to you in a minute. But Adrian, you got your hand up. Let's go to you first, and then we'll bring Margaret in possibly. So yeah, go on.
Oh, thanks, Steve. Steve, I wanted to ask whether you had any sense that there was some prospect, perhaps, of us moving to a citizens' pension, where everybody over pension age gets the same pension. We could do away with all of this record keeping of home responsibilities and credits for this and credits for that. We could, from the sound of it, save 1,500 civil servants overnight by telling them they don't need to do that exercise anymore. And if we're moving towards equality, then presumably the cost of moving away from a contributory system and onto a system everybody gets the same must be rapidly diminishing. Is it yet affordable, do you think?
So I think there's a distinction between doing it retrospectively and doing it for the future. I mean, I don't think we save our civil servants if we only do it for the future, and I can't see us doing it retrospectively. That would be very expensive. I mean, for the future, to be honest, in the coalition, whilst the Lib Dems would have probably quite liked a citizens' pension, I don't think our blue friends would have worn it. You know, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions was doing universal credit, which was all about something for something, and if you work hard, you etc. etc. The narrative on auto enrollment was, you know, if you save hard, you'll be better off and all that sort of stuff. So to then say, but yeah, you know what, you just have this 9,000, 10,000 a year, would have been a tough sell, I think. And so in a sense, we created a sort of citizens' pension by the back door, because frankly, if you're in the country all your life, it's pretty hard not to get the full flat rate pension. I mean, it's doable, but hard, because you get credits for being unemployed as long as you're signing on. You get credits for being on universal credit or the spouse of someone on universal credit. So crediting is becoming quite comprehensive as long as you claim a benefit, the right benefit. You get credits for being sick, you get credits for being on a jury, you get credits for being on remand if you don't get jailed. I mean, you get credits for almost anything. So actually, we sort of do have a citizens' pension once this has grown and matured. The people who miss out are the people who come to the country partway through their working life. And I think the argument there would be, well, they've probably got a pension somewhere else, maybe. You don't, obviously New Zealand has a 10-year minimum. But it doesn't fit, in the current climate, paying full pensions immediately to everybody doesn't feel like a top priority, I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah, Steve, it just sounds like we're keeping it for political reasons, because politicians want to sort of make it feel as if there's some incentive for people to go to work. I kind of think the incentive to go to work is about work and pay rather than about what pension you might or might not get in the future. So I wonder whether we're just keeping it just for the politicians' benefit.
Yeah. Interesting, very interesting. Margaret, should we come to you and define shambles?
I think everybody perfectly understands what shambles is, and I think Steve has just perfectly described it. It's just horrific, and I must admit I do wonder if the complexity is deliberate. Is it intentionally, sort of nitpicking to try and put people off? And it's been very successful for a number of years, and it's now coming home to roost. And it's appalling to see the cost of correction. I've a lot of sympathy with Adrian's point, because you think, crikey, if it costs so much, to correct it, why not just give everybody some money and make it a nice, simple solution? But as you say, Steve, it's all kind of political. But everything does tend to get layered, doesn't it? One thing improves, and it can only improve for the future. Therefore, everybody in the past has to have a mad scramble. But I do worry that the complexity might be a way to put people off, and therefore rely on the fact that people won't claim. But just on a slightly different theme, from the scams perspective, there looks like some ripe ground for some claims management companies to get stuck into this, particularly if some people can get, you know, £10,000, £40,000, which they're owed. But I would worry a little bit as well that there might be an opportunity for scammers to get into this, you know, fight your claim for you. You know, I don't know if there's anything we can do to avoid that.
Well, I think that's right, Margaret, and that's why, I mean, at the risk of banging LCB's drum, you know, we created a website because there wasn't one, and I don't mean the one we've just done, the one we did originally for this big issue. Excuse me, we've had 800,000 visits. You know, there's clearly an appetite for this information, and you just couldn't find it. You know, we looked on the government websites, and fine, if you know where to look and you know what to piece together, you can just about do it, but nobody can ever find anything. And so we created a simple website so people could kind of do a bit of this for themselves. And likewise with the Mothers Missing Millions stuff, you know, we're trying to enable people to DIY all of this, and going on Woman's Hour and talking about it to say to people, look, you can fix this, it's not that difficult. I think on the complexity thing, there may be times when things are made complex to make things difficult for people. I actually think all the complexity I've described was probably with the best of intention. I give you an HRP, you know, it was brought in 1978, presumably off the back of Barbara Castle. I mean, I imagine Andy Young was there at the time, we'll remember, but, you know, was in response to a feeling that things weren't fair. And therefore another tier of complexity, which was introduced with the best of intention, but, you know, then hasn't quite worked. So I don't think, because none of this really had to be claimed mostly. Most of it should have happened automatically. So it wasn't kind of, they introduced HRP, but hope nobody will claim it. It was kind of a right. It just hasn't actually been delivered, I think.
Yeah, but I also think if this had been happening in the private sector, there would have been all sorts of claims, maladministration, people being, you know, people suing companies, and you know, big government is quite difficult to take on. So hats off to you, Steve, and to LCP for really pushing this issue and making it live. And hopefully, you know, the fact that you're doing this will actually, you know, help avoid people falling into the claims management trap.
Yeah.
And just on that point, Margaret, I mean, we'll come to Henry in a minute, but also just on that point, going back to the scamming idea, presumably, Steve, this department or the 1,500 civil servants, I mean, are they getting guidance from the regulator on the new sort of action group on anti-scamming, things to look out for, and all the different tactics they try? Is that part of, because again, what you don't want to do is make a bad thing even worse, I guess. Presumably that's right, Margaret or Steve, I don't know.
I'm not aware. Not aware that they are.
No, it's not on the agenda for the scams action group. But as I'm a member of that, it could well become on the agenda.
But it's getting it on the agenda for the redress, I guess, and for the claims is to make sure that they are filtered, to make sure there isn't any nastiness going on, I guess. So I mean, you know, maybe Steve can lobby a few people and make sure that's part of the process, I guess. So.
And just as a PS, there's a group I haven't mentioned who we are fighting for still, and there was a cut-off date in 2008, and after that point, your husband turned 65, you should automatically get uplifted to a married woman's pension without action on your part. But pre-2008, you had to make a second claim for a state pension. So as a woman, you turn 60, you claim your pension in your own right based on your own record. A few years later, your husband turns 65. You had to make a second claim to get the married woman's pension. And if you didn't get it. And if you only realise now, you only get 12 months backdating. And indeed, it was a case like this that first alerted us to this whole issue about 3 years ago. And the family who we wrote about in that first column have never got any money beyond 12 months backdating. So we went to the upper tribunal earlier this year. We happily, the son of one of these ladies was a barrister. And so he defended his mum. In the case, the DWP put their top QCs against us in a tribunal. I submitted evidence and so on. We lost, unfortunately, but we're now going to the Parliamentary Ombudsman. So we've gone to the DWP and complained for maladministration. If you run a system that requires a second claim, you blooming well ought to tell people. And they failed dismally. So you complain to the DWP, they tell you to get lost after several months. You then complain to something called the Independent Case Examiner, ICE, for the DWP. They have an 11-month backlog. So our cases are just about to get to the top of their in tray in a month or two. We've got 5 lead cases. We're going to try and get maladministration on DWP's failure to run an effective system. If we fail there, we then go to the Parliamentary Ombudsman. So, and these pre-2008 women, there's again tens of thousands, potentially owed, well, hundreds of millions. So, you know, there's still groups who just never knew about any of this stuff.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Henry, what are your thoughts? And then we'll come to Alan Chaplin. Yeah, sorry, go on, Henry.
It's a very minor fault, and Alan's fault is a better one. But these pension credit capital limit, they've set and last looked at in 2009, haven't been updated at all since then. Any reason for that? Is there an excuse for not inflation linking these limits in a way that every other limit seem to be reviewed on an annual basis? And
Yeah.
what's missing? Is it just not getting onto the Treasury's to-do list, or is it the DWP saying we can't be bothered fighting?
No, it's fiscal drag. So because the law, whereas the law requires the rate of pension credit to be linked to earnings, so a minister who wants to do something else has to pass a law to change that. The 10,000 threshold has no statutory indexation. So the status quo, the default, is freezing it.
Oh, right.
And so what that means is if I as minister wanted to raise the 10,000 threshold, I have to bid to the Treasury for the money to raise the 10,000 threshold, because it will cost me pension credit money. And your DWP department bidding to the Treasury for 73 items, where does raising the 10,000 threshold on pension credit come? It never gets onto the list, basically. You're right, of course, 10,000 is absurd. At least there isn't an upper capital limit, but they still impute penal rates of interest above the 10,000. So it's still, I mean, it's worse for working age, but even for pensioners, they're imputing ridiculous amounts of interest. So short answer is yes, of course it should be raised, but it suits the Treasury to just let inflation do its work and raise a bit of extra cash that way.
Okay, thank you.
Alan, do you just make your point there? Alan, do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, I was just wondering what information is going to be exposed from the DWP systems to the dashboard. I mean, you can already get the national insurance history via API, although it's rather well locked away behind Verify. But I mean, if nothing else, if it just delivers a state pension and the dashboard shows that you've got a auto enrollment pension but no state pension, for some reason, that's going to be a red flag to say it's highly likely you should have something. Here's how you go to do it.
Yeah.
And whether that would be a link to LCPs, like other sites on here's how you track it down, or you actually build your own dashboard instead and pull all the information in.
Yeah, good question, Alan. I mean, there's a few issues here. I mean, so first of all, pensioners, so dashboards are not for pensioners, they're for workers, broadly.
Yes, that's a separate thing. That
well, indeed, but the women I'm particularly worried about are over pension age and could be getting a pension and aren't. So unfortunately you wouldn't get them. I also think the absence of something is quite a weak signal. You log into a dashboard, you battle through the ID verification, you get a list of half a dozen auto enrollment small pots. Do you even notice something that's not there? Would you notice that you haven't got a state pension projection? You might. It could help.
I wouldn't expect the user to. I'd expect the provider of the dashboard to.
And the provider of the dashboard doesn't see the data.
Yeah.
It's your data. It's not theirs. So they present it to you, but they can't see it. Now, you could get it exported and then you can see it. But as it stands, you can't see the data on the dashboard as a dashboard provider. It's not your data. It's the member's data. And a quirk here, which I think could be a problem, is national insurance number is not a required field. So to use a pensions dashboard, you'll have to be verified on name, address, postcode, date of birth. But NI number won't even be mandatory to enter, and even if you enter it, it won't be verified because the ID verifiers can't verify NI numbers.
No, but every pension provider, or not every, 99.5% of pension records have NI number on it, so the pension providers can deliver it back to the dashboard.
No, but that's not my point. My point is, if I want to use the pensions dashboard at midnight or something like that, and I put my name and address and my date of birth, and I faff around proving who I am, and you've just talked about battling with Verify and stuff like that, A, I don't have to put an NI number on to access the dashboard, and B, even if I do, I might mistype it, let's say, because we all got fat thumbs.
Oh, yeah.
if you're the DWP, are you going to send state pension data to somebody whose national insurance number you don't know?
Oh, you wouldn't expect it to come from the user. My point is, you would log on, you'd be verified as Steve Webb.
Yeah.
One or all of your pensions would deliver the national, and this can all be encrypted.
That's not how it works, though. That's not how it works.
It should.
So it's a so I think the scenario will be it's enough hassle to log on to this blessed thing and prove who you are in the first place. If you don't know your NI number, you've forgotten it, you don't know where to look, you can't be bothered, and it's not a mandatory field anyway. I mean, how many of us put non-mandatory fields on forms? I mean, it's enough faff to put mandatory fields on. If NI number is not mandatory, there'll be a bunch of people who will go onto a dashboard, and I think DWP will refuse, I'm guessing here, refuse to send state pension data to people who haven't provided an NI number. So I think we may well get a bunch of people whose dashboard doesn't have the state pension data on, and then ring the DWP angrily saying, "Where's my state pension?" And they'll say, "Well, don't know, you've got one." You know, so I think the dashboard and the state pension, because you can already get your state pension data anyway from somewhere else. I suspect the DWP will play hardball on what they send to the dashboard. Anyway, so I'm not sure dashboards are going to help.
Steve, I'm just opening up a bit of a question there, which is so. And again, this is not a dashboard session per se, but so what are the security measures to get your data out of the dashboard? And how easy is that going to be for people to say, oh, well, their name, their address, their date of birth is fairly easy to find on Companies House and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Isn't that wide open for, sorry, Margaret, scamming, I'm going to say it, but it is wide open. What security measures are there to
so it's going to be
people
a bit like going on gov.uk and accessing your tax data, your NI record, your state pension forecast. You have to prove your ID with, you know, passport, driving license, utility bill. So, you know, you go through an ID verification process. At the moment, there is one ID verification provider, Digidentity, who are the people behind Verify, funnily enough, who've got the contract at the moment, but there may be others we don't yet know. So, you know, if I happen to know, Steve, your name, your address, your date of birth, etc., I can't just put that in and get through. I'd have to have some documentation that matched all of that. But, you know, they are neurotic about cybersecurity, and rightly so. Can you just imagine if you could get behind into the pipework, you could access all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, you could. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. I'm conscious of the time, and we haven't asked you any questions yet, Sir Steve, about Liz Truss. Everybody's itching to ask you a few questions on that. There's been a few headlines about probably three core things. Let's start with regulators. What do you think about Liz Truss? What's she going to do about the regulators?
I would be quite surprised. I mean, reorganizing regulators is almost never the answer to any question, I don't think. But I was often asked, why do we have FCA and TPR regulating pensions? And I'm sure one day somebody will combine them. I don't think it'll make a lot of difference, to be honest, because you'll still need to regulate trustees, you need to regulate, you know, contract-based providers and so on. And okay, if you're in one building, coordination's a bit easier. But you've got to remember, she's got, what was she going to do? Deliver. Do you really want to spend 2 years doing primary legislation to restructure regulators, merge them, have new logos, redundancy packages for people? It's just, you do nothing else for 2 years if you do that. So I think she will, you know, give the Bank of England a bit of a kicking in some symbolic way, but will be warned off restructuring regulators, would be my guess. I just think that way lies madness.
Okay. Question number one. Question number two, triple lock. We should have had Baroness Altman on this call as well. But anyway, triple lock. What do you think about that? That's on the agenda, maybe.
I mean, I think, again, you've got to remember what point in the electoral cycle Liz Truss got appointed. You know, we are nearer the next election than the last one already. She's got to make, they promised when they broke the triple lock this year to reinstate it next year. Now, all right, inflation might be 12% and that's horrific, but it would be incredibly difficult to break it 2 years running and then go into an election saying, trust us. And of course, the April 24 uprating could well coincide with an election, spring 24, seems quite plausible to me for an election. So either they break it twice and take it out of the manifesto, which seems very unlikely, or they stick to it. And that would be my guess. And of course, if the Tories stick to it, it's very hard for Labour to be outbid on pensions. I mean, to say, you know, vote for us and we'll give you smaller pension increases when, and of course, the other thing you have to remember on pensions is I get journalists all the time saying to me, intergenerational fairness, it's outrageous, we're giving all this large extra pensioners. And you say, well, hang on, the pension went up 3% this year. and their energy bills have gone up, whatever it is, and petrol and food and all the rest of it. And then next year, next April, by the time we get to next April, inflation will be higher than this September. So the pension rise next September won't even catch up for this year's inflation. So, I don't think pensioners will be sitting there thinking they've had the life of Riley and, let's ease off and give some money to the youngsters. They will be feeling pretty angry, I think, and will have, not turned the heating on till December and all that stuff. So, I think it's easy to think that because we see the billions numbers and the big percentage increases, if you're a widow on a married or an elderly woman on a married woman's pension of 85 quid a week, a few extra percent is, cup of coffee once a week. It's not, it's not a king's ransom.
Yeah. I'm not sure there are. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Well, as I say, is, and as I often say to people, given that we're seeing the rapid death of private sector DB among the newly retired, personally, I think the state pension is going to be more important, not less.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And, I'm not sure there are many pensioners who have the life of Riley, but it's strange. NHS?
Yeah, I mean, they just want to fix, don't they? They don't want to sit down and look at the structure of pension tax relief, particularly. And again, Treasury's doing a review, as they always are, of all the different tax relief. So in theory, there could be a review of pension tax relief. But again, electoral cycle, it would take quite a while to sensibly do a big restructure of pension tax relief. You ain't going to do it in the last 18 months of a parliament. So I would expect a fudge for the doctors. And there are different fudges available. There's a rum and raisin, there's a coconut. You could do what they've done before and pay the scheme pays bill for them. So there's no annual allowance charge. You could say doctors don't have an annual allowance at all. I mean, if you want to just fix it for the doctors, you can fix it for the doctors. But I don't think coherent is an adjective that you would apply to what they're going to do.
No. Maybe to sort of break the barriers down, we should maybe call some of these pensions after ice cream. Actually have a rum and raisin,
tutti frutti strategy,
a vanilla. Your pension credit's your vanilla, and your tutti frutti is your citizens' pension, and they really understand that probably. But it's a great idea.
Yeah. And now Henry wanted me to say something about state pension age, as he's on the phone.
Go on.
The phone
You go about state pension age. Yeah, go on.
So just very quickly. So Baroness Neville Rolfe is doing the second review after the Cridland review. She's reporting to ministers later this year. We get the public decision next year. And I think the dilemma they've got as a department is between the last review and this review, the life expectancy numbers pre-COVID went dramatically backwards. So, the number of years you expect to live at pension age has gone down by 2 years in 4 years. It's mind-numbing, the change. So if you stuck to 2/3, 1/3, 2/3 of your adult life in work, 1/3 in retirement, you couldn't justify going to 67 in the next parliament. But they're going to. I mean, I think the Treasury are not looking for extra things to spend tens of billions of pounds on at the moment. So I think 67 will happen. But 68, really, if you stuck to 2/3, 1/3, you wouldn't do 68 till I'm dead. I mean, whenever those, Now the catch is they want to do 68, and so what they will have to do is find a new way to ask the question to give them the answer they want. And I think they'll look at fertility, something Andy Young has pointed out. Fertility projections have fallen off a cliff. So they'll say, well, yeah, maybe we're not living as long as we thought, but we're not having babies either. So there won't be any babies becoming adults to pay taxes for all these retired people. Therefore, we have to jack up the pension age. So I think if I were Baroness Neville Rolfe, I would wonder what I'd spent my time doing. Because just like John Cridland, he did a review, lots of thoughtful stuff about people in Blackpool and all that kind of stuff. And they just say stuff that we'll just pick a year. And they'll do exactly the same with Baroness Neville Rolfe, I think, next year. And again, will they legislate for it? I wonder, because the second you do an act of parliament that's got state pension in it, you get WASPI amendments. And they think they've nearly got through WASPI because nearly all the WASPI women are now actually getting pensions, not quite, but many of them are. So I don't think we'll see state pension age legislation in this parliament. So we could have another state pension age review, which doesn't get legislated for, and then they'll have to do another one in the next parliament. So the whole area is a complete mess.
Wow. Alan, you got your hand raised. A question as well from you, Alan.
Yes, just wondering who you meant by they when you said that, Steve, when you meant Treasury or current.
It's always the Treasury, Alan. It's always the Treasury.
I always use the state pension age and talking to friends about an example of how difficult planning is, because at the last election, current government said 68, Labour's manifesto was 66. And it's like, and for most people, you're going to have several governments before you hit your state pension age.
Yeah, well, not only that, and the link to the normal minimum pension age as well. I mean, that's just carnage, really. I mean, they've made a complete pig's ear of the 67, 57 stuff.
Yes, agreed. For something that matters to almost nobody.
Yeah, and hard to see what it achieves, because if you're going to take your pension at 55, you've got to take it at 57 anyway, and you still wouldn't have it in retirement anyway. But
no. And if you can worry about 55 or 57, you haven't really got much of a problem.
And as David rightly says, he's done an excellent article on the subject.
Indeed, there you go. David's got a link on there as well. Next, my question. We're running out of time, I guess, but my question is about Guy Opperman. Your thoughts on him and going forward? I mean, obviously, you don't know per se, but you might have an opinion as to what he's going to be doing next, or continuing on doing something else, or what's your view, Steve, on that?
Yeah, all I would say, I mean, leaving personalities aside, all I would say is that when prime ministers are setting a government and choosing a government, they care not one jot about the continuity of pension policy. It won't even be a consideration. So, she'll need a cabinet of people she trusts who are going to deliver and be good communicators and all the rest of it, and be in the right factions in the party. She'll want to, reward the 2019 intake, keep the red wall happy, have people in the Lords and all that. And it's like a jigsaw, and you fit 100 people in 100 places. And it's not inconceivable the current incumbent could randomly happen to stay in post. My guess is not. I mean, he backed Rishi Sunak, which probably didn't help, but they just don't care. I mean, the classic one was somebody. Well, there were two classic ones. One was, I forget the exact name, something like Alan Evans, and somebody rang Alan Evans up and said, "Oh, hope you're pleased to be appointed to the House of Lords." And he was like, "Well, I never expected that." And he turned out it was the wrong Alan Evans. And then the other reshuffle where, a minister was sacked in a reshuffle, and she said, well, why? And they looked and they said, "Oh, we didn't intend to do that. What happened?" And they discovered the Post-it note had fallen off the whiteboard with her name on it. So they appointed someone else to the post, and she's no longer a minister. It is not a pretty process, I'm afraid.
Oh, wow, fantastic. Steve, that's been an absolutely brilliant session. I hope everybody enjoyed it. It's a big day in politics, and a big day in pensions. I really wish you success with your campaign. The website has been put on the chat. If you'd like to look at the chat, the website link to the LCP site is there. That was an absolutely fantastic session. So Steve, thank you very much indeed. Next week, quite topical, we've got LCP, funnily enough. It's a bit of an LCP party this month. They're doing a slot on trusteeship and sole trusteeship. And one of the things that's come out of the news is that Guy Opperman are looking potentially at getting rid of member-nominated trustees. So that could be quite a hot topic next Tuesday. We'll be talking about trusteeship and member-nominated trustees. Will they be disappearing? And the rise of the sole trustee. So should be a good session. If you're not on Playpen, please register and join. If you are on Playpen, please share with friends on the Friends tab. And we really, really appreciate you joining this morning. Have a safe day. We wish for peace in the East. As usual, and let's hope that Liz can push through a peaceful negotiation on that. And I wish everybody a great day and a great week. And so, Steve, thank you very much indeed. That was a brilliant session. Thank you very much.
Thanks all for joining. Much appreciated. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot. Bye. Bye.